Good morning, and welcome to this OW2 conference. We're really glad to welcome you this year again, and I hope you have enjoyed the breakfast, and then you're ready for this all these sessions, these wonderful presentations. I want to thank first everybody which make this event possible each and every year. First, I want to thank Orange. We have supported the organization since the beginning and hosting the conference this year again. Thank you, Christian, which represents Orange here, and all the people working in Orange for the event. I want to thank the management office. This is all the people from the organization working day to day to make the event possible. They have worked really hard these last weeks, and they have still a lot of work to do these 2 days. And I want to thank you. Thank you, Catherine, Selva, Martin, Olivier, Cedric. Thank you all, and I hope you enjoyed their effort. And of course, a special thanks to our keynote speakers first, and all the speakers which will present their project, their vision of open source. This year, the topic of the conference is a journey. We are proposing a journey between values and value, and I will let Christian Paterson to introduce the topic.
Okay, hi everyone, and on behalf of Orange, welcome. It's fantastic to be hosting this conference over the next 2 days, the OW2 annual conference, and it's great to see so many of you here today. Obviously, I think some more people will arrive, which is will be nice to see. There's going to be more than 150 of you here from 5 different countries. You guys are representing more than 70 different organizations, which is quite incredible, really. We have organizations such as French ministries, educational establishments, industry, finance, automobile, engineering, IT development, IT integration, IT consulting, and I think there's also 1, maybe 2 telco representatives in the room. And isn't that something that's fundamental about open source? It's the bringing together of an eclectic mix of passionate people to deliver great IT. But before we get into that, I want to do a special mention to a few people. Of course, the OW2 management team, who have organized a great day. The Hello Labs auditorium management and staff who've again outdone themselves with this great location. And also a call out to Mary-Sophie Collin from the Orange OLS communication team, who has been invaluable in helping us coordinate everything. So well done, you guys. And thank you. A big thanks. I'd also like to give a shout out, a quick shout out to everyone here who is concerned about digital accessibility or accessibility. Now, some people here today have accessibility needs, so well done for making it here. It's not always easy getting across Paris, and it's your presence here is appreciated. Some people here are working on accessibility solutions. And I find that really inspiring, that in the age of a movement towards a digital society, that open source can be a dynamic that brings communities together to enhance digital inclusion and not create exclusion. And isn't that what the heart of this subject is really about? Values. This conference is about values and the journey that has taken open source from its infancy and brought it to the forefront of today's technologies. It's a dynamic that will continue to drive an increasingly visible and large proportion of tomorrow's technologies. And I think that's really quite incredible. But let's remember 2 points. Open source is not an end state. Open source is not an end goal. It's not your business model. It can be, but generally it's not. Open source, above all, is a collaboration model that's founded on the principle and the values of freedom. It's a collaboration model that is paid for, financed, through various mechanisms. Companies and organizations who provide paid developer time or materials or rooms. Sponsorship of events. Participation to communities through community fees and, of course, developers. And let's not forget the passionate open source coders who work sometimes at the weekend providing their own personal free time. And this participation to the open source dynamic, it's not a P&L, a profit and loss cost center. It's an investment. It's an investment that delivers returns that are tangible to your products, to your services, to your solutions. And that's, I think, a valuable point to remember. So it's not about giving away resources. It's not about giving away skills. It's not about giving away your competencies or your time or your materials for free. Open source delivers. It delivers technology enablers. Everyone knows, of course, that most of the web is powered by open source technologies. That's a given, or an obvious one. But what about artificial intelligence? Many of the frameworks are powered through open source technologies. Or core network transformation, something that's revolutionizing the telco world at the moment. Or service platforms. Or blockchain. Or many other ideas such as connected objects. These enablers are all provided through open source. Okay, but let's go beyond that. What else does open source deliver? Open source delivers, and has the power to deliver, sovereignty over our digital landscape. And I'm not just talking about sovereignty over our data, which I think at the moment is something at the forefront of everyone's thoughts, with the various news that's been happening over the last few months. But also sovereignty over our code and our technologies and their roadmaps. And beyond that, open source delivers personal recognition. Personal recognition for the developers who are working on open source. And I think that's great. After all, human inside. Okay, so these values enshrined by open source allow people and organizations and competitors to come together, to work together, to pool their resources, to pool their skills, to pool their knowledge and materials in order to provide benefits for everyone, and also benefits that are visible, of course, within their products and services. And these are benefits that would be impossible or improbable or highly costly if they were done in isolation. So I think to wrap up what my opening message is here today is that open source is a no-brainer. Open source delivers value because of its values. And I'd like to thank all of you here today, the guest speakers, and also you guys in the audience, because it's because of you that open source is great. So I'm going to wrap up my talk there, because I've spoken long enough, I've already taken too long. And I'd like to wish you all a really great conference around open source, a journey of values to value. Thank you.
Let me get started. I think we're running a little bit late, so I wanted to illustrate the journey. That's OW2 in one slide, in one picture. First of all, we're a code base. We do a code base. That's what you have on the right of your screen. we're not a lobbying organization. We're an organization that actually creates software, that produces software, that makes software available for the public, for the economy. Free software. This software is developed by a community in the framework of activities. All this is running smoothly in the framework of an open source and transparent governance. And we keep ourselves independent, so we have no allegiance to any IT giants or economic powers. We're not going to be acquired. We are totally independent. We run an independent infrastructure because our members pay their fees. That's OW2, but we started somewhere ago, and we owe everything to probably this mail that was sent in '83 by Stallman, and where he started saying, I'm going to develop a free operating system. That's the original one in '83. That's more than a generation ago. 10 years later, this mail, the next mail came out. This is the mail sent by Linus Torvald about his project of developing another operating system. And that started what we called, and this developed into the first phase or first layer in the free software world, which were in fact driven by these 4 freedoms: the freedom to use the code for any purpose, to read the code, to modify it, and to redistribute it. And that launched a bonanza of projects, of open source projects, that led to what we call community open source, free software, essentially free software based on those values and those freedoms. And these freedoms, in fact, are what made us here, and what made all these developers proud. So this works because it is technically efficient. They can share expertise, they can access to other people's knowledge. And that's still going on today, and we still have a number of those projects, about 1/3 of the projects at OW2 depend on those values, on this trajectory. They can be attached to this kind of origin. But something happened in the 90s and at the turn of the century, where free software gave way to something called open source, commercial open source. So this is where we're hitting the value, we're approaching to the value part of the journey. Why? Because free software and the free freedoms enabled, in fact, a new business model. And what happened is that all the product categories, the software product categories that were driven, that were controlled by proprietary vendors, became challenged by companies or a new generation of vendors that actually were implementing an open source business model. And that's what we call a business-oriented open source. It's so much business-oriented that big companies, these giants, whose name you would never immediately associate with open source, actually have invested millions of dollars and other currencies in open source and in open source projects. So that's what we call that's the second layer, I would say, that developed, I would say, at the beginning of the century, with, we call it business open source, commercial open source for the entrepreneurs. And it works because, from the business perspective, it is efficient, with reduced marketing costs, free community, access to free community expertise, sudden market share, etc. Now, around 2010, something happened. Because of the internet, because of the hyper-connection, because of applications and networked applications, distributed applications, online services, all those big giants suddenly realized that they were running on open source, but the context had totally changed. We were not in the context of enterprise computing, we were in the context of a global internet-based computing. And everything being interconnected, these giants who were running their businesses and their technology platforms with open source software had to extend this open source software, had to extend the technology, but by doing so, would they do this by hiding where they were developing? No, what they did, they found that there was a virtue in sharing this technology, and they opened up their technologies, open sourced it, and created what we call now an ecosystem-based innovations. And that is this research-oriented open source aimed at creating open source commons for the benefits of everyone, of the whole community. That's what we call maybe open source by committees, because it's really driven by negotiations and some sort of backstage power play sometimes. And it works because it is, or it was, strategically efficient. The idea here was really to be moving with everyone along with the pack, to have the same information as the others, to make sure that you would not make the wrong strategic decision, the wrong investment that would commit you for the next 10 years on a path that the rest of the industry would not be following. So this, I mean, the benefits of sharing the code really was evident for most of these investors of big companies and all of the followers. And open source is the vehicle for open innovation now. So we have here the three, in our journey, the three layers. I'm not saying that one replaced the other. They added it to each other, and the world of open source today is a bit complex, because we have the first layer, let's say, of community-oriented projects. We have this layer of enterprise-oriented project by companies developing an open source business model, and we have this other layer of innovation-oriented open source or research-oriented open source by companies working together to develop new technologies. So that's the way we see the journey. And now, just to finish a couple of questions, because on that background, the idea was we see that the values carried by the free software have led to a huge value. What's the value of the internet today? Because we can probably connect internet and open source in a way. What's the value of the internet, the economic value of the internet? Who captures the value? It's a question of perspective sometimes. So I want to leave three questions, three thoughts and that we will have for the round table. The first one is that the value of software itself is latent. Code is text. You don't do anything with code. It's like having food out there in a can that you cannot open. What's the value of food you can't eat? Or think of a recipe. You read the recipe. What's the value of this recipe if you can actually have this food in your plate? So the value of software, the value of code is latent and has to be made real by human activity, by somebody. And this somebody are the distributors, those that package the software, those that implement it, that adapt it, that migrate the data into the software, etc. So the implementation of the software is what actually made the value of the software real. It's pure dialectic. You have the software and you have the implementation. And the result is something that is useful. And software is useful by leaving the boundaries of the IT industry. Software becomes useful when it helps clothes designer or clothes manufacturer manage sizes and colors and deliveries, etc. The second, so software is, you need to make it happen, and it's made happen. Software does not implement itself yet, so it's made real. The value is made real by human activity. The second thing is that we've heard you hear that code sharing or making everything public will hamper innovation because you will remove the motivations for innovators to get the benefits and the fruits of their innovation. When you look at what's happened, if you think of the internet, etc., sharing the code, sharing the software makes possible collective innovation. And by making possible this collective innovation, it drives progress. So code sharing is not hampering innovation progress. I would claim that code sharing, on the contrary, is a vehicle for, speeds up innovation. And the last question or idea we could have that is connected with our theme this year is, in fact, you have two perspectives that may be in opposition. The one from the engineers, the developers, the researchers, or the academics that consider software as shareable knowledge. We walk on the shoulders of giants. We build next generation, the next version of the software on the work by benefiting from the works of those who've coded before us. That's one perspective. And then you have the economic or business perspective, the perspective of the business people, the marketers, the sales people, the shareholders, who want to capture that value. And they think of software as a property that has to be owned. And I think these two perspectives are like putting together two magnets, finding the balance point. And I like to think that OW2 is precisely at this balance point between managing and promoting the values of free software, but also enabling the creation of value thanks to free software. Thank you.